So, Cliff, Black Medusa, what did you think?
Well, I was quite baffled by this film, but in a really good way. And I think it's, this is one of the reasons why it's really worth having a movie membership, because they have films like this on. I still don't know quite. I've only watched it today, and I still don't quite know what to make of it. But I really like that about it. I would say that overall I enjoyed it, but I'm I'm still don't know what to think about it. Enjoyed perhaps isn't the right word. Um, Firstly, I love the way it's made. We've talked a bit about black and white before, and I'm always impressed when I see a black and white film, because I think technically in some ways it must be harder to make than a color film, because you've got less to work with, and so the light has to be right. And I just really enjoyed looking at this film. I thought it was beautifully shot, and really interesting in terms of, like, there was some just tracking shots of buildings which didn't always seem relevant, but somehow I always I kind of liked the pointless mundane shots that were sometimes inserted in, and then I really liked the way the sound cut and was distorted and crackled, and I assume that was supposed to be happening, that was wasn't, because I had that with a film recently where actually I wasn't sure whether there was a problem in the streamed version of the film. It wasn't actually on the film. So I always wonder when the sound starts cutting whether there's something wrong. But I really liked the way the sound was cutting at several points, and the way sometimes the camera shot would just jump, and they're kind of techniques that you might question what their purpose is, and I don't quite know what purpose they had in this film, but I really liked that. Just as a package, the way it was made, I found really impressive. I mean, I wonder about the gender politics of this film, and it's not that I have any particular view on it, but it's like it's a film made by two men, and in some ways, I don't know, I kind of had there were several points that I just asked myself the question, I wonder if this is in any way misogynistic. I don't think it is. I don't think there's a gender issue here, but in some ways this might seem a strange thing to say, but I might have felt more comfortable if this film was made by a woman. But then I thought, is that even sexist to think that? Because actually, why can't the kind of the bad guy, the bad person be female? And so in some ways, I think it's interesting that it's made by two guys, and whether this is the male gaze or female gaze, given that this is such a strong female character, I just don't know how to interpret the gender politics. So it's just I wondered about that, but actually, as the film went on, I mean, obviously there's no justification for murdering people, but they're a delightfully seedy group of men that she murders, and there's something kind of, as a kind of revenge movie, clearly she's troubled, she's traumatized by something, who knows what's actually going, what motivates her, but clearly she's traumatized. And, as a kind of revenge movie, there is something quite satisfying about it. I love the way it's structured. It feels like it's got a really strong narrative, with the 9 nights, and the way that we get a title page for each night, so you kind of know where you are with the film, although although there's a lot of baffling stuff in this film, and it's like I didn't always understand what was happening, I like that structure. It felt like it kind of guided me through. I mean, it is really interesting how she has no emotional connection, no emotional depth. It's like she's emotionally shut down, you know, so much so that she can't hear or speak. You know, she's so cut off from people. And I found it's really interesting how she picks up these guys without saying anything, or without, I mean, sometimes she's just sitting there and you know, these guys are happy to follow her, you know, to take her home with actual no connection whatsoever. And you know, there's something interesting about that, about, you know, the male attitude towards women. And it is kind of really compelling. I think it's, you know, it's curious. I mean, I guess the only thing we see of her emotionally is this rage, you know, because when she commits these murders, and I thought the murders were really well presented, you know, they're pretty horrible, with especially the broomstick. The broomstick at the beginning is kind of, oh, but you know, it's really well done because it's not gratuitous, it's not too graphic, it's suggestive, but the sound effects are so real. We really hear the knife kind of as she kind of, the rage in which, so there's a kind of emotional release there. And she has this kind of partial connection with the colleague, which is all very strange. And yeah, I really liked the way it built up to, and I don't know that much about the story of Medusa, and it does make me feel like I need to know more about that story. I know it's the woman with the snakes in the hair. So I liked that it built up to that image of the Medusa in the museum, and the whole kind of mystery of that scene when it builds up almost to a climax where she sees this Medusa image, and then there's this guy, and she kind of follows him, but you know, you just don't know what happens. And so the whole thing is mysterious. And yeah, as I say, I don't know what to make of it, but I do know that I enjoyed it, and I think it'll definitely stick in my mind.
Yeah, I felt the same as you. It was funny. My friend rang me when I just put it on, and she said, "What are you watching?" And I said, "It's this black and white Tunisian film about this woman who doesn't speak and can't hear, who's just killing all these men." She said, "Oh, is it one of your movie films?" Said, yeah. So, but I think you're right. It's a real pleasure to just come across these little curios, you know. I didn't know what to make of this film either. For a long time, I was really baffled by it. And one thing in particular I really couldn't understand. And that was why the Nora's character, the colleague, I felt like her fascination with, or infatuation with her, wasn't quite credible. It didn't really make sense. I didn't know what it was based on. And then suddenly I realized why. And I thought it's because for most of the film, there are no other subjectivities. Nothing is seen from anyone else's point of view. And there was no life for this other woman, because everything is from the point of view of our protagonist. And then shortly after that, quite a bit after that, you have that scene in the gallery, and it all kind of clicked. And because she's looking at these objects, and of course in the gallery, the object is privileged, but it's completely decontextualized and dehistoricized. And you have an object in a completely blank white room. And although you might have these plaques that attempts to kind of decontextualize the image, that attempt at contextualization is very spare and incomplete. And I suddenly realized that's what this film is perhaps suggesting, that to our protagonist, other people are blank. You know, there is no subjectivity or inner life for these people. And that also made sense of the fact that the violence throughout the film what I found most disturbing about it is that it's weirdly muted and anticlimactic. There's no sort of drama, even though they're horrific to watch. They felt oddly, they just sort of happened, you know, particularly that first one, that there was no sort of build up, and I just couldn't get my bearings with the film. Yeah. And I realized then that the whole film is about a pronounced detachment. And even so far as the woman is so detached, as you say, she doesn't speak and she pretends she can't hear. And although the fairly obvious sort of comparative text is that a girl walks home alone at night, and the movie makes that comparison in its little thing. But actually, I thought this film reminded me most strongly of Under the Skin, as a film about like an alien sense of otherness that is disorientating and baffling and beguiling. And throughout you have, as you say, this disjointed editing style, these superimpositions, strange fades, freeze frames, odd tracks that don't entirely sit within the narrative. And all of that helps formulate this sense of utter dislocation and detachment that is actually really disquieting, but really captivating. And as you say, there's some incredibly strong, arresting, original imagery. There's that really weird scene where the guy puts his fist in her mouth, and really odd tracks of like nighttime streets that look beautiful and menacing and imposing and strange. There's a lovely shot on a rooftop that just tracks out across the roofs, and you hear the birds, and that too reminded me of a shot in Under the Skin. I think it's genius, this shot where she lays on a stone shelf at the back of this hut, and then he superimposes the images of these pines just soughing in the wind, and it goes on for about 10-15 seconds, and it's just strange and beautiful. And so I found the film really beguiling. I didn't understand a lot of it. Yes, okay, the Medusa thing suggests a revenge narrative, and of course the way she picks up these men suggests that she has some kind of agenda. You never really understand what that agenda is, and I think it works best almost with those obscurities left as they are. And there is, of course, it's kind of bookended with this completely baffling, weird parable about the man who's down the hole and the woman who pulls him out the hole on her way to the moon, and her colleague reads that and reads something as this is being played in voiceover, as though that's what she's written down for her to read. You know, I don't know what to make of all of that. Your comment about the gender politics is interesting. I hadn't really thought of it, and I don't know what to make of it. I mean, it certainly is saying something, isn't it? The fact that, as you say, the men quite happily follow her home, even though she doesn't communicate with them at all. You know, the statement that makes is fairly bold, isn't it? And the men are pretty unpleasant and despicable. And then when she's walking home and the guy does the, you know, where are you going, darling? You want to get in the car? And she does, and she kills him, you know. All of that, as you say, there's a satisfaction in that on the, you know, base kind of revenge thriller level. So it sort of works as a genre piece in a way, but it's not quite like anything else I've seen, and I found it really impressive.
Yeah, I agree. The thing about the hole, the man in the hole, is really intriguing, I think, and I'm happy in the next few days. I'll be happy to have time to mull over that a little bit more. I mean, it does feel like it's something to do, because if the story builds to her growing her hair long enough that he can climb out of the hole with her hair, and that then she still, as soon as she's with him, so she's like longing for this man to be out, it would seem. It's like she's longing for love, but when she gets him, she doesn't want him anymore, and so she cuts the hair and the man falls back in. And so, you know, perhaps that fits with this idea of her being, you know, so disconnected, that even when she can have connection, I mean, I don't know, you know, it's weird. Was it was, who was it in the museum? were you saying it was her work colleague, or it was her?
No, I don't know, but the significance of the museum for me was just where I suddenly realized that this was sort of a kind of microcosm for the sort of rationale or behind the film as a whole.
Yeah,
I can't actually remember. It was her, wasn't it, in the museum?
I think it was her, but I wasn't sure whether you were suggesting it was the other one. And they didn't look the same, but I get stressed in films when people look similar enough that I'm not 100% sure who they are. And I didn't, because I only watched it today, I didn't have time to rewind it and check that. But
one thing I forgot to pick, one thing, like, it's very successful, like, defamiliarization. And there's one particular shot. Do you remember where she's in the gym? But it's like a good 15, 20 seconds before you realize that the camera is looking at a long row of exercise bikes. It's a very slow pan up from the floor, and you're completely, it's an abstract for like 15, 20 seconds, you know? So it's very, very effective at that defamiliarizing stuff in a way that just leaves you on edge all the time.
Yeah. And I think I liked how the camera often sat longer with a shot than, like, for example, with the bikes. And there's a scene where she's walking down the street, and it leaves us for too long with the shot. You know, in some ways you would naturally want to edit it just to make it a bit tighter. But I felt that sometimes there was this looseness allowed in the film, which just added, as you were saying, you know, just added to the general feeling of, you know, it being slightly disquieting, unnerving. And it's there's something really interesting about the way this is put together and constructed.
Yeah, really interesting.
So definitely recommended if, you know, a little weird.
A little bit weird, but if you like that sort of thing, it's a very good one.
Yeah. What are we watching next?
Next up is a film called Looking for Venera by Narika Sefa.
Looking forward to it.